Haven't.
You are rolling.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. Here we are in, let me see which week we're at, week 9 of 16. So our number of sessions is dwindling, and we've got a couple weeks off there towards the end for the community planning. So just a few more sessions, but this is one of my favorite ones. We have Christopher Mitchell with us from the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. And they're a national organization, but Chris' offices lives in St. Paul, Minnesota, not far from me in the scheme of things, and is one of the true advocates and true experts around community broadband models, especially with a focus on local ownership, local control, real public-private partnerships. And so we're happy to have Chris with us today, talking about ownership and partnership models. And I'm not going to say too much because Chris will cover it all, and I don't want to step on his presentation like I maybe have done in the past. So Chris, welcome and thanks for joining us today from Washington, D.C., where I'm sure you're bending ears and changing minds.
Actually, I'm here for a big party.
Ah!
So, one that I have been reluctantly drug into. Our organization, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, turns 50 years old today, and we are having a gala or gala, depending on your pronunciation. And I am 100% opposed to such things, but here I am. In fact, you can see that I am dressed informally. I will put on my suit at the last possible moment. So,
well, Chris, celebrating is a good thing.
Yes.
So take off your curmudgeon hat and have a good time.
Yesterday we had a great day in Baltimore, working with a lot of folks on digital equity. That's what I like doing. So I'm glad to be here with you today to talk this morning. We at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance have been working on internet access for about 20 years, and I've been running that for the past 17. We've had a focus on how communities can make sure that they are very well connected, despite the fact that local governments and states are not able to require private companies or any sort of internet service provider to deliver a high quality level of service or to meet certain price points or other such things. And so our research is focused on the ways in which we can make sure everyone has a connection when you can't just pass a law to say, make it so. That's focused a lot on municipal investments, cooperative investments, as well as different types of partnerships. So we'll go through those today. And I think because I'm on the laptop, I probably won't even see the chat until the end, but I will aim to reserve a lot of time for Q&A. And Bill, as always, you can interrupt me in the middle if there's something that is important enough to go over a little bit more detail right away.
Will do. Thanks, Chris.
All right, I'm going to see if I can get this shared because I'm used to doing this on my home computer. All right. Is that looking like a proper? Great. All right, and then also I'm in a hotel room, so if I start to stutter, I will switch connections to a hotspot. But I like to start with a declaration that I feel like people should feel more confident and more willing to talk about broadband issues and to tell their elected leaders and other leaders in the community about how important this is and what kind of things need to be done, even if they are not experts in broadband. And so I like to note that I worked briefly in electrical policy and energy policy. And I would say that most of the people who are working in energy policy and are making important decisions about how our energy will be delivered, they probably don't know what an amp or a volt is, right? You can be very involved in this stuff without having an engineering understanding of how the things actually work. We have basic utilities of all sorts, and We know enough to know that everyone needs access to them. It should be affordable. It needs to be reliable. And we need to, I think, shame those who would use their technical knowledge as a weapon. Because some people that do have a good engineering understanding, I think, then assume that they are the only ones that should be able to talk about how to accomplish our goals. So the first key lesson that I like to just throw out there is that you all should feel emboldened to talk about this, just like you would other forms of utilities. My organization is 50 years old today, and we've long focused on a lot of issues that impact the communities. We work on having strong local businesses, including local banks. We work on the energy sector, although I've never done that work for ILSR. I came in and I started working on internet access right away. We work in the waste stream, and we also work on the with composting and recycling type stuff within that work. Our work within Broadband is focused very much on how to make sure everyone is well connected. I have worked on the ground in about 45 states. I have a lot of sense of different models that have worked, and I'm also happy to talk about models that might be aligned with our vision that did not work. In some cases, communities have made investments that did not work out, and we've studied those as well, because I get a little bit thin-skinned when people say that I'm an advocate for municipal broadband. I do think that it is a smart investment for some communities, but I do not think all communities should be making these investments. I think that they need to do their homework individually and figure out if that is the smart thing for them to be doing, or perhaps how to go about it. Not every model works for every community, and that is due to perhaps issues of law. It's certainly due to issues of culture, preference, and a variety of other factors. Some of the things that we do is we write about how communities are solving their problems. We try to do a little bit of writing every day with stories about what's going on that touches on community broadband solutions. So that might be about rural co-ops. It might be about urban approaches to solve issues. It might be about national or state policy, but we try to write every day. And we have a series of podcasts in which we explore these issues. Bill has been a guest in the past, and I've had numerous guests from various people within different functions within Illinois, some of the co-ops, some of the municipalities, and I think perhaps more than a few interviews with Matt Schmidt, who runs the office, as I'm sure you know. We also did the ACP dashboard, which is that program is now running down the discount for many families. But we've been tracking those numbers, and through acpdashboard.com, if you have not seen your local enrollment numbers, you could find those by going through that portal. Now, as we talk about community solutions and partnerships that involve public ownership, there are more than you might think. Now, the vast majority of this map, which is a few years old, or is based on data that is a few years old, the biggest color that you see first is orange. Those are the telephone cooperatives. Many telephone cooperatives have done a good job of building out fiber optic assets. This map depicts entities that have built or are building fiber optic networks to serve homes. The first big splotch that my eye comes to is in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. Those states have a lot of coverage because they have a lot of locally rooted cooperatives that have made big investments. This is only nonprofit business model fiber. And so in Illinois, you see a lot of blank spaces, but you actually have a number of private companies that are doing good work there. So that is not representative of the fact there is nothing in Illinois. It is that some parts of Illinois have nonprofit fiber optic business models. Those are here. Some have wonderful for-profit, locally owned companies, and some other companies, bigger companies up in the Chicago region, they've also made investments in fiber to the home. But here we're focusing on the nonprofit approaches. So the electric cooperatives in blue, this map actually understates where they are today. Many more of them have been built out into many more areas. Out of the 800 electric cooperatives that we have across the nation, there are more than 200 who are offering fiber to the home, and more are still getting into that business. And then finally, we have the municipal fiber networks. There are hundreds of those, approaching 900. I think more than 200 of them are citywide, where every address, more or less, can take service. But those are usually in higher density areas, and so you don't see them from this high-level map necessarily. But there's been a lot of investment from community-owned networks, which includes cooperatives, municipal ownership, where the city or county itself owns either the full network or significant assets, or partnerships in which the city or co-op might own the network, but work with someone else to deliver services across it. This is just a different way of showing some of the different municipal networks and a few of the electric cooperative networks, but it still gives you a sense that there are quite a few of them in different approaches, more than many people realize. Now, in Illinois, Highland Communication Services is one of the municipal broadband models. This is a network where the city already had municipal electricity. They decided to add a broadband service to that. That service, I think, struggled for several years. And one of the things that we see is when a city builds a network like this and is actually delivering these services, it is rapidly attacked by big cable and telephone companies, as well as think tanks that are very opposed to public ownership of industries or even infrastructure in many cases. And so there are times in which networks like HCS are maligned, and that is incorrect. And there are times when it is correct. I think it is correct to say that Highland Communication Services did go through a period where it was struggling. Like many municipal networks who enter into that, not every municipal network has a dark night, but several of them have. Most of those, when they've struggled, have gotten through it through a change in management or a new strategy or some kind of different approach. And so I'm not sure how many of you have heard of this or whether you've heard positive or negative things about it. One things that we notice from afar is that it seems to have a high market share in the community. It seems like many people are happy with the services, and it certainly seems to be paying its bills. And that means it's paying for the ongoing costs of operating as well as its debt. And that's often how these things are measured, even though the true measurement of a network like this is the community better off? Does it have more economic opportunity? Are kids better able to have a better shot at education? Do adults have a better shot at education? Is there more of an opportunity for telehealth and all kinds of other things? But on the key metric that people are interested in, is it paying its bills? Yes, this network seems to be, although there were a few years when I think that was in doubt. They were able to shift to a better strategy and get more people signed up that are very happy with their service. Across the country, we've seen claims that when local governments get involved with this, things don't go well. Those claims are generally from people who are paid to say that more than actual data. We at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance are deeply concerned about whether or not communities have real opportunity for economic development, as well as a healthy life, a flourishing life. And so we don't want cities to make investments that don't go well. So we've tried to figure out, what is the story for 200 some networks? One of the things we looked at is where we rank the best networks in the United States, which is something that PC Magazine has done. And this is a graph that we blew out. And we thought it was interesting that of the 10 best performing networks in the nation, of them, 3 of them were owned and operated by municipal governments. Those are the 3 dark blue ones, and that's Colorado Longmont's Nextlight, Chattanooga's EPB in Tennessee, and Iowa's Cedar Falls Utilities. The other, 7 networks that are listed there in the lighter blue are private companies that are considered the best in the nation, and those have engaged in significant partnerships with municipalities. And so we've seen evidence in many ways. This is just one of those lines of evidence that when local governments do their homework and they get involved, we can see really great things. The companies in green, those are not 11 through 7. Those are not 11 through 19. We just pulled out from lower rankings where those big private companies are. And that's not to say that they are bad or not doing their job. I'm not here to say that they are terrible, but I would say that they leave gaps in many communities that need to be filled. And so we see communities able to exceed what the biggest companies and the most well-known companies do in the community. As we looked at different strategies for how local governments could partner when they weren't interested in operating their own network, and we'll talk about different ways that communities can operate a network. There's not just one, there are many, but many communities would prefer to have a partner. And we looked at this report, and in 2016, we came up with a number of recommendations, and those recommendations continue to be accurate, in my opinion. We made several recommendations, including that communities have a right of first refusal if the partner that they are working with is going to be sold or acquired or change in any significant way, that the community would have the right to buy the asset, the network asset first. That is not because they necessarily want to. And in fact, in this study, we talk about UC2B, the Urbana-Champaign collaboration with University of Illinois, as well as others in the community, to build a network that is now probably approaching 15 years old. That network they took care in selecting a partner to work with, and shortly after they signed the deal, that partner was acquired. Now, the people behind on the board of UC2B did not want to buy the network. They did not want to operate the network. But because they had the right to do that, they had more influence over the terms of the deal and the structure that the new ISP coming in, what that might take. And so, that's where I think it's important to make sure you negotiate a strong contract with your partner. Some of the other things that we talk about in other places are where if you have a partnership, you might ask that the company put in extra conduit or fiber for municipal use. And you should fight for you to be able to use that under any conditions. They might want to say you can only use that for public entities, but you can strike the deal you need to strike, but you should argue strongly for as much authority as possible. We can talk more about that if people have questions about that later with any specifics that might be useful. There we go. The next thing is a little sticky key situation here. In some cases, communities decide to raise their own taxes to pay for the network. This is not, I would say, the most common. In most cases, local governments make investments without increasing taxes. But in some cases, and it's true more of rural than urban areas, we have seen communities decide to raise their taxes to help pay for internet infrastructure, to pay for fiber optic cables and conduit, or wireless. In some cases, those involve a vote of the public. Some of those have passed, some of those have failed. Depending on, I think, often the level of marketing that the community does. So local government is not able to advocate for one way or another in a referendum. But if local people are organized and doing their work and prepared for opposition, they often are able to pass these. And I think that's because a group of people that's working on this isn't going to put a year or more of their time into an effort if they think their neighbors are all going to vote it down anyway. So there are a lot of things to consider, but we have seen very conservative communities, and particularly in Colorado, as well as more liberal communities voting to increase their taxes to help pay for broadband infrastructure. And I think every year people are more willing to do that because of the importance they place on this. Now, some places have established a new cooperative, but there are very few of these. Illinois is the kind of state where it's not unimaginable. But as you saw on the map, most of the cooperatives that offer internet access at a high quality level are either telephone cooperatives or electric cooperatives. Those are cooperatives that the federal government helped to start with funding and also often had a monopoly service territory originally that they were able to build on. And so with broadband, there are no monopoly service territories. And so it is more difficult to finance a brand new cooperative than it was for other forms of infrastructure. Nonetheless, this report demonstrates how it can be done. And I think this report has a particularly good discussion about how local governments and the communities more broadly, even outside of that local government structure, how they can work together in an education campaign to educate people about an investment, why it would be important, how it will be done. And then this particular approach had a very complex financing mechanism that I actually think can be replicated as well, where you don't have the ability for a local government to just write a check for the whole amount or to bond for it. So this report covers how to form a new cooperative, but more importantly, how to run an education campaign in the community and different financing mechanisms that one could consider when you're trying to figure it out, even if that is for a partnership or some other model. In Vermont, we see a fascinating new approach. I mean, not entirely new, but the scale of it is new in that we have almost the entire state embracing communications union districts, which is a structure that they more or less, the nuances of it are unique, but it is just the same thing as other people have pioneered for rural water districts and other rural infrastructure districts. These networks are physically owned by the collection of towns, but then they are often operated by a private partner. Sometimes that partner is a cooperative, sometimes it is a for-profit business. There's a variety of approaches. But actually, Benton and my organization, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, are on the verge of releasing a report that details this that my colleague Rye wrote. And so if you are interested in this, I have no doubt that Bill will be promoting it as soon as it is off the presses. In some cases, we see more informal public-private partnerships where, in this case, this company, which is a company that does both fiber optic and wireless investments, privately owned, and they sometimes have official structures in their deals with local governments, and in other cases, they might have a handshake to get on top of a water tower or a silo or something like that to serve a rural area. You can strike these kinds of bargains with the right providers, and I think we've seen some where the private provider struggles to deliver, some where they really exceed, and I cannot tell you with certainty which is going to be which. It is not always obvious who is going to be able to make the turn to accelerate their investment in a partnership to succeed. There are real challenges with this, but I think you should be open to different approaches based on where you are, or at least know that these different approaches have worked in different areas where you might not have a very formal agreement, but you're kind of working with a company that has experience building and will offer you perhaps a discounted service or a free service to certain either households or schools or something like that in return for access to what we would call vertical assets. Things that are tall to allow you to get wireless down or to make it easy on them for permitting, for fiber optic in the ground or such things. So happy to address that more in the comments. Now, as we talk about public-private partnerships, I'm going to discuss some in the next couple of slides that are focused on very big companies have engaged in public-private partnerships with local governments. And some of those seem to be working well. One of those is with Consolidated Communications, which is a company that is the incumbent telephone company in much of New England now. They were, I would say, had a very bad reputation. And more importantly, or more accurately, the companies that preceded them before Consolidated purchased those assets had a very bad reputation. Consolidated started off difficultly, but has now embraced public-private partnerships in some places that local governments are excited about. If you have the opportunity to have a public-private partnership and you are choosing between a local cooperative, and I have two listed here that I've heard a lot of good things about more locally in Illinois, or a national company, even if you have the exact same language, I think you will have better results from a locally managed company based on what we have seen in many examples across the United States. Local companies are fundamentally different than the big companies. Many of those ways are positive, but also they often have less access to capital, and they may have some difficulty not having the biggest engineering teams and things like that. But what I think is more important is they are rooted in the community. And so they have incentives to do the best job possible because they run into their customers in church and in the grocery store and in all the different places. People know how to get a hold of them if they are dissatisfied. And so often local cooperatives have a more of an incentive. Local for-profit companies as well often have an incentive to do a better job locally. They're generally doing this to try to not only do well as a business, but also to really move the community forward. Whereas the bigger companies, they are required by both federal law and practice to maximize returns for their investors. And so a local for-profit company might make community investment a top priority, but by law, the biggest investor-owned companies are not able to do that. Now, some of them may be making important investments and doing it for various reasons, and so I'm not saying they're bad, but you have to understand that they are typically not as rooted in the community and likely to do the local customer service and other things like that. So an example that we see, first of all, I think, Google Fiber has done some of these partnerships. They would be greatly annoyed with me, and they go by G Fiber now, I should say. They would be greatly annoyed with me for suggesting that they were one of the bigger companies. They view themselves as more of a smaller, rapidly growing company that operates under different demands. And they have engaged in a variety of partnerships that I think are broadly beneficial to the public. I listed a couple of those here, but that then led to Lumen, at the time CenturyLink, partnering with Springfield in Missouri. I know there's more than a few Springfields, but this is Springfield, Missouri, in a partnership. And we haven't seen CenturyLink likely to do more of those, so we still hope. But that's the third largest telephone company in the United States, having engaged in an interesting partnership with local government, where the local government owned the service and where CenturyLink came in as a competitor. It is rare to see these companies go head to head with, in this case, AT&T on municipal infrastructure, but it has happened. In the case of Consolidated again, they have engaged in significant numbers of partnerships in New Hampshire and Maine, where they will work with a community such that a small community in which Consolidated is already offering telephone service, the community will bond to pay for a fiber optic network. This is a fiber optic network that probably comes in cheaper than if a brand new company was going to build it, because they effectively build that network for Consolidated. Because Consolidated already has utility poles and everything else, they can do it more rapidly. And then Consolidated has in many cases guaranteed the debt, so there is very little risk to the community. And then Consolidated makes payments over the life of the debt to the community to pay off that debt. We have not seen this spread very far outside of the New England area, specifically Maine and New Hampshire, but it is a model that certainly could work, and we've been expecting to see some other companies, approach that. I'm still waiting on it. In the case of a local provider in Nebraska, Allo, which serves, is expanding to some other states past Colorado as well. They have done some partnerships with local governments that are similar, where the local government owns fiber in the major arterials and down some streets, but then does not own the fiber all the way to the home. And this is important for a technical reason that I'm going to discuss, but I just want to warn you, you don't have to understand what all this means. This is a diagram of a fiber network going into a neighborhood. And what is important to know is that in some of these partnerships, the community owns the fiber that runs to what's called the MST, the multi-port service terminal. And then it goes on a drop to the home. So these would be perhaps one of these pedestals in an alley per block or something like that. And in the pedestal is where the city network ends and the private network begins. So a private company is the one that is doing and it could be a co-op as well, but the internet service provider is doing the connection from the pedestal to the home, which we call a drop. And what's interesting about this approach is that it is unlikely to result in competition. And so if you are doing this in a way that we've seen some cities, they say that they will lease their fiber infrastructure, the city's fiber infrastructure, out to multiple ISPs. But if every internet service provider has to do the drop to the home, their cost of acquiring companies is still very large. They still have more than $1,000 probably of cost to acquire a customer. And so you're not going to see a lot of competition. In other public-private partnerships, the city owns the fiber optic network all the way to the home. And in those situations, the cost of an internet service provider to connect a home is probably just a few $100s at most. And so that might be 20% of the cost of fully connecting a home in the other model. So you would see more competition likely in a model where the cost of acquiring a customer is lower because of architectural design for the network. You don't have to know this necessarily, but you should be asking a question of a consultant or someone who you're working with to structure a deal to make sure that the architecture will make sense for your goals. If you're trying to get one solid provider, they might be happier with an arrangement where they have to do the drop because they know they won't face as much competition. Other providers might have different preferences. So even though you don't have to be an expert on the architecture, it can help to make sure you're asking questions about whether the network technically will make it easier or harder for you to accomplish your goals just based on the economics of how it will work. The last model that we're talking about broadly is open access. This is where a community would build a network, and whether that goes to the home or whether it goes near the home, cities could run it in what's called open access, where they would allow multiple internet service providers to compete for it. Utopia is an example of this, the biggest municipal network in the nation now, a network that for many years actually was something that was called a failure, and I think accurately discussed as so. They pulled it around, and they are now arguably the best provider in Utah, and they are working with communities in other cities in multiple other states to move forward with this. They are an interesting network, but they allow more than 10 choices for residential service for people to choose from, and pretty low prices as well. There are other approaches to open access, and there are holy wars about this, about which model is the best and which does which. But we did a video about Ammon, Idaho, which pioneered another approach. They're a smaller town. There's a company now that is working with many small communities to build out and to give them access to multiple providers where they have a fiber to every home that is owned by the community. They have a unique approach for financing, which takes a lot of the risk out for communities that don't have a lot of bonding authority or capacity. And so that video is dated, but still accurate. And that model has expanded quite a bit to be offering those options out. And then these slides, I believe, will be shared with you, but you can recall that video easily, or you can just, it's not that hard to find with an internet search. Other models that we see that are less common include a conduit-only model. In Nebraska, there are very strong laws against municipal broadband, municipal investments in networks. And so in Lincoln, they built a conduit system, pipes underground, and they leased it out to providers. It has resulted in more investment in downtown with multiple providers providing new business services, as well as a partnership with Allo, that provider I talked about earlier. And then West Des Moines built out a network as well, in this case with Google. And then Mediacom, a major cable company, is using that as well to connect people, and that's resulted in more competition. The conduit networks may or may not fully pay for themselves, but they also can be used for smart grid, smart cities as well, and a variety of other things for municipal usage. If you're in a more dense area, the New York City Internet Master Plan is a master class in how to gather evidence about the benefits of better internet access and the harms of communities not having internet access. The city of New York has decided not to move forward with this for political reasons after a mayoral shift. But we believe that is a blueprint for cities of any size that would like to just enable private investment where it may not be practical for them to deliver their own services. And again, if there's interest in that, we can talk more about it. But the last slide is that if you told me that I had to solve a major broadband problem in most communities, the first place I would look is public housing. Trying to this problem across an entire community can be very difficult. However, trying to solve it simply in public housing is a good place to start. It's often where the need is greatest. And where you have apartment buildings, even if they're not very large clusters of apartment buildings, the economics of delivering high quality service to apartment buildings and the units within them is much friendlier than trying to solve this problem for single family housing. Here we discuss the economics of that, and that's something that we could discuss more if there's any interest in the Q&A. So there are so many different partnerships. There are a great many ones that I think haven't even been developed yet. I think there's still a lot of room for creativity in this. And I think we're going to see more cities continue to build networks, whether that is targeted to one neighborhood or more, or citywide. But there will be a lot of approaches that we see coming forward. So let's do Q&A. Bill, I don't know if you want to lead anything off.
Yeah, and I don't see anything in the chat yet, but I'm sure that will come up. A lot of these are folks in our cohort here represent entire rural counties. Besides the RS Fiber Co-op, which of course offers fixed wireless as well.
Yes.
Other great example, and I guess the CUDs are another great example in Vermont of where they cover large rural areas. What are you seeing other public solutions there?
Yeah, some that you know better than I do in Minnesota, where in some cases we have cooperatives that have served their entire territory that they historically served. And in some cases, they've expanded on their own. Sometimes they've pursued grants to be able to expand on their own. And in other cases, a county has said, what would it take in order for you to come into our county, even though you haven't historically served our area? And so these are some models that Bill knows very well. In some cases, that is a financial, grant from the county. In other cases, there might be some other approaches. I think when one is doing that, engaging the state can be helpful. One of the things that I've loved seeing in Minnesota is that there is a county, Dakota County, which has done a really good job of making smart investments. This is a county that is very urban in the north and very rural in the south. And they have a person that has just done a phenomenal job. I mean, he's saved the county tens of millions of dollars through his investments that I would say he has really championed. And some of the things that he's done to save money is that the state might want to get fiber from one location to another location, but not have an ability to pay for it. But they have materials, and they would donate reels of conduit and other things to it in return to have the ability to use some fiber within it. So look for partnerships, both with ISPs as well as the state. Other counties need access as well. They partner with, in that county, they partnered with other counties because if a natural disaster hits, you need different paths out for emergency communications. And so, many of you probably know this better than I do, but you want to make sure that you have these regional networks. And so there are private companies that might want to get in on that, and as well as public agencies. So that's one thing that comes to mind immediately. I think that there's a lot to be said for just knowing who to talk to at the state and transit agencies and things like that. When there are opportunities in the future, give them time to get them into their capital improvement plans and that sort of a thing. Bill, I don't know if you have anything else. I'm now stuck on that approach. Are there others that I should think about?
No, I think, obviously the economics of building rural fiber to the home take a lot more patience than an urban neighborhood in terms of customers per mile. Public sectors face the exact same challenges as for-profit companies do, but the real advantage of the locally owned is that the more patient capital, I think, is the biggest thing, is a 20-year outlook as opposed to a 3-year outlook that Wall Street tends to put onto the providers. One of the things I think your Dakota County example is great in that it really is a platform for then government innovation of how do you share services or how do you back things up. And so these counties now that are connected to the Dakota County network, I know, use each other's networks for backup and disaster recovery and things like that are a lot of benefits added on. If you own the network, it's easier to do things like smart grid, street lights, other kind of smart applications that if you had to pay whatever provider for each of those connections, it quickly become cost prohibitive, much higher risk to invest in these new technologies.
Yes, and I should say that if I was working with the county and they had a business model, they had a potential partnership, and they just couldn't quite seal the deal, there wasn't quite enough there, they couldn't find the right financing, I would talk to Connect Humanity as one of those places to find patient capital. It's a national organization that I've worked with on many occasions. They are very interested, particularly where there are communities that have been long historically marginalized, and they can bring some bank financing occasionally at really good terms for banks that need to meet their CRA obligations, their Community Revitalization Act or Reinvestment Act obligations. So there are some folks that are specialists in that. There's one thing. Oh, one thing I was going to say is that I do think it's important. I mean, this is something that it is wild to me that we haven't solved this problem. And as Bill said, I mean, I'm coming out of my mind has been in Baltimore for the last few days, where the cost to connect a home is like $1,000 or $1,200 per home, and we are foregoing tens of thousands of dollars of opportunity per home. I mean, the city of Baltimore spent, not the city, but the schools spend like $22,000 per student per year, and that investment is greatly diminished when kids go home and can't get internet access in the home. Any child that then has behavioral problems, in part because they are not able to access the internet, they're falling behind in school. It's a recognition that people don't care about them. Society doesn't care as much about them. And so I've been thinking a lot about the value of this. Connecting a home in many of your counties might be $5,000, $7,500 when you blend it all together across your counties. It could be more in some cases, but when you really blend it across many counties that are east of the Mississippi, you find, I think, on that order of $500 to $7,500, and that's a 20-year cost. That family having internet access, it's probably thousands of dollars of value per year that is generated from having that, from new economic productivity, educational opportunities, long-term benefits, and things like that. And so I think part of the job that you all have to do is to get more comfortable saying, yes, this is expensive, but it is an investment we have to make. Electricity transformed our communities, and internet access is doing similar things in terms of productivity and benefits to the community. At this point, you can't build a fiber network and say, oh, now people are going to move here, but at the same time, that people are leaving and businesses are leaving if you don't have that access. And so it is a prerequisite. And so in public financing of things, it is about priorities. And part of our job is to raise it as a priority among elected officials because it is too often been seen as a private sector investment, not the job of the public. But we have to do the work of making sure people see it as a public investment in some cases. And then you have greater opportunity to do things if there's a greater willingness to put some public dollars into it. I'm not saying that, I think many of you would immediately think, we're really struggling here. We don't have this kind of money. And I understand that is the situation. We still have to do a good job of making this a high priority. I see there's a question in the chat. I'll come to that in a second. But one of the things that we have seen in surveys in many states is that people rank broadband as one of the most important problems to solve. And the only way that we can make sense of that for homes where people are deeply worried about economic opportunities and a variety of other challenges is that people recognize that broadband is a problem we can solve. We are going to always argue about education policy. We're always going to be worried about environmental issues. Like there's things that we can do better on. Broadband is a problem we can solve and not worry about moving forward for the most part. And so that is something to keep in mind as we're prioritizing these things. I think there's challenges with some of the partnerships. I think many of you are pretty limited in who you can partner with, and that's what I'm guessing I'm seeing here from Boone County, is that you have a limited number of people to partner with, and the people you've attempted to haven't been very good at working with you. I'm not sure about the power authority method or model, so I don't know enough about Boone County specifically to have a sense of what exactly can happen. But the question I have is, if there is a nearby cooperative that has largely built out their territory, can you encourage them to go further, to come into your area and have conversations with them about what that would take. It is hard for a cooperative to do that in the middle of them building their own territory, because their member owners will say, why are you building to people who aren't owners of the cooperative if you haven't connected everyone who is? That still can be done, depending on things. It might be cheaper to build out into parts of Boone County than it is to finish up a nearby area. But that's where you have to have those conversations. And unfortunately, I don't know enough about the local details, I think, to make great advice offhand.
Yeah, and the thing I would say, I tell communities, the words you never say to a provider is, well, we don't want to be an ISP and we don't want to do this ourselves, because that is the ultimate hammer, I guess, that a public sector entity can say is, well, and this is what they said in Sibley County. If, I guess I remember those public meetings where every farmer stood up and said, well, I'm a conservative, but we want to make sure that we have this in our communities. And if you won't do it, then we will. And they did that. And it's made a big change. And I have to say that, there's a lot of these providers say there's not enough marketplace. And then if the government does it, that private company will then overbuild the public sector network in an attempt to maintain their market share. And so instead of having no fiber networks or one, then now we have communities that have two. It's a tougher business model for the community if all of a sudden, especially the bigger the company, the more likely they are to take resources from other marketplaces and bring them to compete against you. So suddenly, Charter, I think, is famous for this, where all of a sudden, the public sector is going to do it. We're going to lower our prices. Suddenly, all their existing customers get brand new. Oh, we're going to double your speed and cut your price. And people click and say, sure, I'll take that. Well, they just have signed a 2-year agreement to stay on that provider's network. And so that is a real challenge. And that's one of the reasons these public sector networks have trouble at the beginning, is that all of a sudden there's this new competition that everyone is saving money, whether they're on the new network or not, because the incumbents improve service and cut prices to respond. So, I think you just have to, Justin, keep working at that and keep casting the net farther out. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, I'm gonna, if we do some stereotypes, I'm assuming that many of the people in the audience who are from more rural counties are representing predominantly conservative folks, and we hear, good questions from those folks. And one of the things I immediately think of is I'm disappointed when I hear people thinking that more conservative folks are less likely to support infrastructure investment, because of course they often support roads that are essential. Those are roads that are run at a loss, to the communities and to the taxpayer generally, where we use general taxpayer dollars to run them. And so I've seen, the history of everyone across the political spectrum has supported infrastructure investment. I think questions that people have is, well, if the private sector can't make this business model work, why can a government model? And questions about that, because there's often an assumption that the government will run things less efficiently than the private sector. And one of the things that I immediately come to is that when one looks at these business models, you have to understand there are different spreadsheets that are used by public investment rather than a private investment. And so if you're a private company, you have some kind of obligation to return additional value beyond what you invest. Your focus is on how many dollars do you get back for the dollars that you put in. A public spreadsheet and also a cooperative spreadsheet is more interested in indirect benefits. And so an example that I would use for an electric cooperative, for instance, is that electric cooperatives are typically not allowed by law to run a broadband network at a loss and use electric ratepayer dollars to do that. And that is smart policy. I don't think we should change that. However, if I was running an electric cooperative and I was seeing that I was losing population, which means I'm losing sales, which puts the long-term viability of my cooperative at risk, it would make sense for me to run a fiber network at a loss because it would result in more investment that would allow my electricity business, which is the bigger and more important business, to thrive. And so, I mean, an example of this is, no one thinks about it this way, but parking lots around shopping malls are a terrible investment. The mall itself is worth a lot. You've got all these businesses in there, and then you give away free parking among greater acreage. It's a terrible investment if you look at it on its own, but combined with the shopping center, it is a smart investment. You lose money on the parking lot in order to drive up sales in the mall, because people are more willing to go to a mall if they know that they can park there easily and shop there. And so, for people who have a lot of skepticism about a government investment or government operation, which are two different things, I do think it helps to describe that from the government perspective, if you can get back all of the money that you put in, that is very helpful. However, in the case of Windham, Minnesota, in Southwest Minnesota, I use this example. They built a municipal network, and that network was on path to more or less break even when it was supposed to. These networks lose money for many years because you spend all of the money up front, and then you start collecting revenue. So there's always a few years where you are really struggling. And at that point at which they were going to start collecting more revenue than they had spent, Fortune Trucking, a major employer in the area, said that they needed a fiber line 1 mile outside of town because the incumbent telephone company was not able to supply it. And this company had just bought a major IT investment, and they were going to move those jobs to a place where they could use that unless the city built this network out. And so the city incurred the cost of building the line out and took an extra couple of years of loss on the network because it kept 60 jobs in town. That is a win for the community because the community is focused more on jobs and other opportunities than it is on just the revenue that comes in from the network. And so when we talk about these things, I don't think it makes sense always to say that one is better than the other in terms of a spreadsheet, but they are different and they need to be evaluated as such. And so when people ask that question of, well, if the private sector can't do it, why would the public sector be able to do it? The answer is because the public sector has a different return that justifies an investment. We invest in the schools, we invest in the roads, all the things that the public invests in. And I'm not here to say that it's always perfect. I know that there are flaws and more in some places than in others. The point is that we all know that we're not going to get all of our money back right now. But by having a better educated workforce, in time, the economy will grow more and it will have been a smart investment over time. So those are some of the things that I think people should appreciate as they're considering blanketly whether it is not a good idea to do it. And then you can argue about specific plans about how to do it.
Yeah, and I think a key discussion element that is just different ideas about the idea of owning it and operating it. And so the public sector is great at building stuff and owning long-term assets, but operating it is a separate decision. So there's many communities that operate the network as a public utility. So it's part, sits next to the city water department and the electric service and parks department. It's just part of the city government, and they're doing everything. They have an engineer, they have billing, they have customer service, they have installers. Other places they build it and then they sign an agreement with one or multiple providers, but usually one, to say, let's do, you come in here, this network is built to industry standards or in partnership with that provider up front. Know that that provider who has services in many other communities is going to go in and do everything. They're going to sell the service, they're going to install it, operate it, deal with all the content providers, do with all the things that they need to do to deliver a service. And I know Chris gave several examples of that, but I just want to make that a more clear that you don't, again, as a city council, you don't have to worry about going and climbing a pole and installing somebody's service. That all that can be outsourced, and then cities can decide, do we want to own this long term, or counties, or do we want to say, look, if you pay the bonds as an operator after whenever those bonds are paid off. We'll just give you the network and go from there. And multiple examples of that.
And different partners will do different things. I've been through Illinois a bunch of times in the past year, and I love the automated plate reading. And at the same time, I was telling my wife when we went through recently as on a family vacation about how as a kid going through, we would always have to stop, and you have these big backups waiting to pay your 25 cents at the toll at the time, or 50 cents. And now it's just great. And I was like, I'm so glad we don't have to wait. And then we hit Indiana, and that toll road operator hasn't invested in that, and I find myself waiting to get a ticket and then paying cash. And like, it was, those are two different vendors that are that have very similar, things that they're doing. So your choice of vendors is very good.
Chris, thank you so much for taking time out of your celebration today. We wish you the best and hope another 50 years for you to not be working a rural broadband, because we hopefully will address this, but there's always things to work on to empower local community economies. And that's really what Institute for Local Self-Reliance is about, is local ownership, local control, keeping the wealth in the community as opposed to shipping it out to PO boxes in other states. So bringing that model.
Yep, and we couldn't do it without people stepping forward to lead their communities, like who come on this call. So I just really appreciate what you all are doing to help move your communities forward, and I hope that we can help. But I wish you the best in that work.
Good, thanks. I want to point in the chat. I gave a link to a handbook now that the American Association for Public Broadband has published in collaboration with Benton. I will say that you have to take it all with a grain of salt because the author is me, but it seems to have turned out pretty good, and we've gotten pretty good response. I haven't got any scathing emails from Chris about it, so that's good. And encourage you to take a look at that as a strategy, especially if you're struggling with broadband providers. And sometimes just the act of a community thinking about becoming a municipal broadband or county-owned network is enough to get people in the private sector moving. Because my old colleague Bernadine Jocelyn used to talk about the wolf and the manger, where the wolf doesn't want to eat the straw, but they're sure going to keep any other grazing animals from doing so. And so that is a way to get into that, I guess, into the manger, out of the manger. I'm not sure where that takes me, but the idea that just threatening to become a public entity, public broadband entity, can be a driver for motivate the either incumbents or other folks seeing the opportunity. Chris, thanks so much. I want to take just a minute to thank people for their hospitality on the tour. It was really a lot of fun, and I think we had great turnouts in all of our communities. So that was a real positive impact. It was great to meet all of you and to be on the ground in your communities. I certainly saw the state of Illinois from top to bottom. That was and on the way home, it was quite a haul, but it was well worth it. And it's just in that tour, you see the range of opportunities and challenges, and why every community needs to have their own strategy for better broadband based on population and demographics and topography and so on. So thank you so much for that. I did come up with an idea about right-of-way and the issue of easements. I haven't checked with any attorneys yet on this, but it seems to me, as we're trying to attract a broadband provider, and in the coming weeks we'll hear from one up in Northwest Illinois that will talk about the challenges of the easements, that a community could begin to collect easements. They could either from an existing organization, an economic development corporation, a farm bureau, local unit of government could start to begin to get landowners to provide easements with the idea that these would be then transferable to a selected broadband provider partner. So if a county went out and they could, using the county's property tax records and the county attorney, maybe using the Farm Bureau, Champaign County Bureau's, Farm Bureau's standard easement agreement, use those property records to generate names, addresses, legal descriptions, could really make this a big deal in the community. You have easement day or something when during the county fairs or big community festivals when people are in town, or just be able to have them stop by some office and sign, maybe have some public recognition. And then that, because this is a huge barrier for broadband deployment in rural Illinois. And so I think anything the community can do to ease that path, ranging from more just public relations, you know, at the round table for coffee with the retired farmers, or through the Farm Bureau or other organizations, but to get as many of these easements in place in advance, that's going to be very attractive to a broadband provider partner. I think you could find a way, and we'll have to talk with the Connect Illinois folks, but where that could be matched. If you can gather that information, that's real cost savings. To get all those easements is part of the project cost. If you can pull that out from the cost side and put it on the contribution side, I believe you could make the case that that is a real budget element. And so hopefully we're going to, I'd like to pursue that more. We're going to be talking with our team about that and see if there's some partnerships maybe that we could get that going. So it's way out of my range in terms of legality and how that would work. But it seems to me that that's a huge value for the communities. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms. Reed has, we've provided a worksheet for any discussions about public sector engagement. And that just helps you guide your discussion. It's great to have this conversation. I know it's real easy at this point in our season here, broadband breakthrough season, to kind of say, oh, let's adjourn right away. But I encourage you to have some of these discussions that that this worksheet will help facilitate. And then you can, I think it's good to have those. And from my perspective, I would not be too quick to dismiss the idea of a public sector role in this program, in your projects. So that's kind of where we're at. Nancy, do you want to talk about the survey counts and the maps you're providing?
Thanks, Bill. So yes, all of the contact people from your various counties that are serving as your point of contact for your survey project have received a link where they can see the geographical coverage of the responses so far as of this morning. Likewise, there are color codes on those maps that help you identify the breakdown of homes versus businesses versus farm ag entities and community buildings or public buildings. And those emails also included a count breakdown of those various types of respondents. So I'm going to go through the breakout rooms and drop that information also in the chat for you all. And note that, you know, those coverage maps then are going to help you generate a target list in your group where you can continue now to make a plan to do some cluster sampling, perhaps some canvassing in quiet areas of your county, and also look at that breakdown and make sure that your county assets and your community, different various community assets are also being taken into account. We have a spreadsheet we can provide that lets you filter by your various communities and get a list of anchor institutions, community anchor institutions, which have the addresses with those. So you can also use that, and we'll include a link to that to be able to be downloaded from the follow-up email. That is where most of the counties are lacking in their surveying so far, is getting those assets covered. But great job to everybody. I think I covered it all. And so good luck, and I'll see you in your breakouts if you have questions, as well as you can always call or email.
Good. Thanks, Nancy. Good. Well, let's go into the rooms, and it's always survey promotion. We're now 2 weeks out from our deadline for the surveys, and you can push. I would encourage you to do that. So that's a key thing. Any progress on the provider interviews, and I encourage you again to try and get those in place well before the planning session starts. I think it's disappointing to me when people get to the 13th week and say, oh, we're still trying to get those scheduled and so on, to try and get some urgency to that. At least the initial discussions. Don't expect you to have partnership agreements in hand as we get into the planning, but really begin that sorting process of who might be interested in your community and what kind of model they might be willing to look at. So to begin those discussions is really important, really as soon as possible. And then just continue to think about the process forward. So a lot of information about how to do projects now coming at you. We've given you a lot of information about the surveys and the maps and so on in the previous weeks. And then now we're going to get into the real project development. I want to encourage people to try and send at least one person, maybe multiple people from your team, to the Illinois Broadband Summit that's coming up next week. I got a call from a former a graduate of our program that said, oh, should we really go? They just received bad news about their grant application for funding. And I think that a conference, there's not only the sessions, but there's a lot of great opportunity for networking. There'll be a lot of broadband providers there. There'll be the state staff that will be there in the Illinois Broadband Lab. So a lot of times great opportunity for informal coaching, information gathering, poking and prodding folks for additional information about how things really work. So I'd encourage you to attend that, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Maybe you'll see some of your Broadband Breakthrough team members there. So thank you very much, and let me know if you need anything from me as you go into your breakout rooms, and they should be open.